got my hair done today. You know when you get your hair done and you're just like, just feels so good, and I'm back to my dark red. I'm loving it. Today's video is gonna be an experience. We're comparing movies from two of the most vastly different decades of horror that I could possibly think of. We're comparing House of Wax from 1953 to the 2005 remake. 52-year difference between these two movies here. The original displayed groundbreaking makeup and practical effects, mastering suspense with the lurking burned man who stole corpses in the night, with a standout performance by Vincent Price at his very best, I must say. This movie made its way into my heart at a very young age. On the other hand, the remake displayed a hypersexualized Paris Hilton, strangely romantic brother and sister dynamics, and some of the most breathtaking practical gore effects one could feast their eyes upon. With a more raunchy teen tone, surprising poetic narrative twists, and the classic final girl outfit we all know and love, this movie also made its way into my heart at a very young age. I actually find both of these vastly different movies to be brilliant in their own right, so I hope that you guys stick around to find out why. Today I'm going to be doing more of a practical deep dive into both of these movies and covering what I hope will be some really interesting topics. Also, hopefully you guys have all seen both of these movies. I know that most of you have probably seen the remake, but the original is super worth watching as well. They're truly both to die for. They both have great twists, so I highly recommend watching both of them before you continue on with this video, but you do what you do. I'll be starting out with a very brief coverage of the plot of each movie so that we're kind of all on the same page if you haven't seen the movies and you don't really care to watch them. Next, we'll be doing a bit of a character comparison. We'll be looking at the leads of each movies, the protagonists, the antagonists, all the main characters. After that, I'll be discussing some of the different effects of each of the movies, how far have we come from the 50s, what's remained relatively the same, what effects have maybe gotten worse, and finally, I'll be covering the more thematic elements of each movie. What were they trying to say in the 50s? What were they trying to say in the early 2000s? What did we fear back then? What did we fear only 20 years ago? Join me today as I fuck around and find out. I feel like in this moment that would have been a really natural progression for me to have some kind of intro music or something. I don't actually have an intro with music, so let me just whip something up real quick. That was frightening, wasn't it? If anyone out there would like to hire me as a creature actor, maybe, don't be shy. Okay, let's just get right into it. So the original House of Wax, this came out in 1953, and it was directed by André de Toth. I believe he was a Hungarian-born director. The budget was estimated to have been between $658,000 and $1 million US, and it made $23.75 million. Back in 1953, that is so much money. So if that gives you a little bit more context, this was a very famous film for the time. Brilliant wax sculptor played by Vincent Price has his house of wax burned to the ground by his business partner as an insurance scam. He was left there to die, but somehow survived, although is badly disfigured. Sometime later, he builds a new house of wax featuring a chamber of horrors with some very lifelike wax figures. Our protagonist, Susan, soon finds out there may be some wrongdoing afoot. Obviously, the plot is a little bit more complex than that, and I will be getting into some more spoilers later, but just in case at some point you do want to watch this movie, I don't want to give away everything. Something else to note is that this movie was released during the decade of sci-fi monster movies. The 50s was very, very big for monsters, so this is definitely an oddball for the decade, but as you learned from my first video in this Decades of Horror series, House of Wax is my #1 favorite horror movie from the 1950s. So let's now move on to House of Wax from 2005. This was directed by Jaume Collet Serra. He's a Spanish director, and you've actually probably seen some of his movies, namely The Shallows and Orphan, both movies that I really enjoy. House of Wax had a budget of $40 million, and they made $70 million in the box office. The remake has a pretty cliched horror movie opening third. There is a group of young adults who are out on a road trip. They run into a spooky stranger, they set up a camp, and the next day their car won't work. Forced to find help, the kids happen upon a quiet old town with a wax museum at its heart. Then all hell breaks loose as the group gets picked off one by two sadistic twin brothers looking to keep their wax figure collection section full. That took a dark turn, huh? This movie came out in the era of the teen slasher revival, kind of. The early 2000s was a really big time for remakes from the 80s, namely remakes of slashers. But this movie was also unique because it was kind of a unique blend of different things. It was a teen movie in keeping with the times. It was a slasher and it was a remake, but it was a remake of a movie that was not originally a slasher. It was a remake of a 50s movie. So this one too, I think, is also unique for its time period. So now we've gone over the plot. Hopefully we're a little bit up to speed now. You don't need to know too much more than that. I'm gonna get into some spoilers for sure, but it'll still hopefully be worth seeing the movie afterwards. So moving on to the next section of the video, we're gonna be talking about the characters from each of these movies. I'm gonna start out with the protagonists. In the original, we have Susan, who really is the lead protagonist, and she is our final girl. Boo! Sorry, just whenever I'm editing, I always pop in here like a goddamn jump scare because I look bomb while I'm filming the video, and then I just pop up looking like this. I thought I would play into it anyways. I had to pop in because I keep calling the main character of the original House of Wax Susan. Her name is Sue Allen, but my brain said no, Susan. So she is referred to as Susan for the entire video, but just know that her name is actually Sue Allen. She has a husband or a fiance or whatever who ends up being like actually useless. So I love that this is a very firmly female-led movie, at least on the protagonist end. And her acting is pretty good in my opinion. For the most part, I think it holds up. Although the more dramatic moments when she has to act terrified or when she has to scream, it's not like the best. But I attribute that more to the acting style of the time period. They really played up dramatic situations in very strange ways. So it's not really her fault. I feel like it's kind of a product of the time to have more unnatural drama. And she's really the only main protagonist. Like I said, her partner doesn't really end up doing anything. We have her friend who is in a few scenes, and she's kind of delightful, but also like her character is just kind of funny. She calls everyone a card, and she has this like little giggle that she does.
Oh, Maddie was such a card.
I'm pretty sure her character is just there for comedic purposes because there are actually quite a few jokes in this movie. It was a little weird though. Her character was weird. My theory on her character is that she was sort of meant to portray innocence and then she was slain by our villain. And I guess that it kind of shows how evil our antagonist was, that he would slay such an innocent doe. All the other characters are just side characters, cops. They're not really worth discussing, but in the remake, we have quite the clan of teen protagonists. I think they're supposed to be teenagers because our lead is talking about going off to college, so I think they're supposed to be seniors in high school. But just by looking at them, that's very unclear. So speaking of characters, we have the ones who are sexualized and the ones who are sexualized, and then that other one who is sexualized, and then there's that guy. That guy does nothing but get beheaded. Love that. The only three characters that matter are Carly, Wade, and Nick. But just so you know, I haven't been able to keep that straight in my brain because when I look at Wade in particular, I see Dean from Gilmore Girls, so I'm gonna call him Dean, but I'm really talking about Wade. And then with Nick, he doesn't look like a Nick to me. I'm just gonna call him Chad because the actor is Chad Michael Murray and I see him as a Chad. So if that bothers you, I'm sorry, that's just how my brain works. So those are the only three characters that really matter, the least of which is Dean. He doesn't really do anything wrong exactly. He just kind of seems like an annoying boyfriend, so I don't know, he's not really worth rooting for. Though I never would have guessed that he would have been the first to go. So I guess it's kind of like the original where you have the love interest who is just utterly useless. And then Chad Michael Murray's character Nick, he's kind of hard to nail down because they do a lot of dancing around with his character. And the dialogue is always like, yeah, he just got out of prison, like he's so bad, he's such a badass. And then like all of his actions in the movie suggest otherwise, and it's like, okay, well, I would have loved to have seen some of that maybe, and then we could have kind of seen more of his character arc happen, but nothing of that nature really happens though. Oh, except for when he says this.
You're the good twin, I'm the evil one.
So yeah, kind of weird, just gonna blow past that. It's just weird because he does all these heroic things and whatever, but he's not presented in that way at all, and he also doesn't really have much of a character progression, but we'll get more into that later. I will say, maybe it made the movie a little bit less predictable, but still, weird. But another weird thing about his character is he was playing the character of Carly's brother as if he was the love interest. It literally feels to me as though the director went, okay, that's great, let's get another take though, and Chad, this time, can you just kind of act like you're undressing her with your eyes? And he was like, yup. So the tension in his scenes with Carly, it's just very off-putting to me. Anyways, speaking of, let's move on to Carly. I like this updated final girl. I think I like her more than Susan for sure. She's really smart, she has these survival instincts that she actually puts to use. In the original, Susan doesn't really do much. She gets captured, she gets shackled to a table, and then a bunch of cops come and they save her, and she's just kind of laying there the whole time. Carly is a very active final girl. She does play a part in saving herself. And I don't know if I would have made it through a lot of the stuff that she did. In all honesty, I would have suffered a mental collapse the moment that I fell into a pile of dead animal carcasses. So she is better than me. So to wrap up the comparison of the characters, in terms of protagonists at least, I think they are a lot stronger in the remake, but a different story can be told for the villains, which we are getting to right now. In the original, of course, we have the lovely Vincent Price, who they did honor in the remake by naming the disfigured twin Vincent. I think the reason why I love him so much as a villain is because of the duality of Vincent that you get to see. Vincent Price, not Vincent from the remake. Again, that's not his character's name, but I'm just gonna call him Vincent because he is the boy, so I will be referring to him as Vincent. In the beginning, he is this man who seems so gentle because he is so enamored with his artwork. He's in love with his figures, he has the utmost respect for his own art, but he's like a bit strangely obsessed.
Forgive me, my dear, for discussing your intimate secrets. I'm sorry. I lose myself at times.
Which personally, I think the way that they portrayed him in the beginning is brilliant because it kind of starts to show the little cracks that are already present in his psyche. I think that was a really nice touch. Rather than making him seem a little bit more crazy, like crazy in love with his work, he was just a little bit too obsessed with his figures, like talking to them and stuff. Talking to them and caressing them sometimes. So I think the madness was already there brewing within him, but then it was unleashed by the destruction of his work. Then he became homicidal and his work definitely reflected that. He had a lot more macabre exhibits, namely the guillotine, which was one of my favorites. Not a fly. There is not a fly in here right now. I'm gonna... Flies make me lose my mind. Okay, I think it's out of the room now. I love that the switch was flipped. The flip was switched. Wait, I love that the switch was flipped inside of him because they do set up some kind of ironic dialogue in the beginning before all of his work is burned.
Who cares a hang about history and wax?
There are people in the world who love beauty.
But more who want sensation, shock.
Morbidly curious. I won't cater to them.
Their money's as good as anybody else's.
I'd put in a chamber of horrors. Murder, torture, execution, scare the living daylights out of people. I don't care for that kind of patronage.
You know, he claims that he has no interest in the macabre, and he more or less says he doesn't want the money of people that are into that kind of gruesome stuff. But oh, how the tides change. In the remake, I don't feel like the villains are super strong, but I do love that they were given an interesting backstory. And I like that they still use wax to cover up the one brother's deformities, which is also definitely a tribute to the original. And we'll actually talk about that a little bit more when we get into the special effects portion of the video. I also like the dynamic, the relationship between the twins. I enjoyed the twist that the more normative looking brother was actually the one that used to be strapped down. He was the more mentally afflicted one, I guess, when they were younger. But it makes sense. It really does make sense when you rewatch it and you think about it, because he has more cognitive power over his brother Vincent, who is kind of the quiet artist type. So I enjoy that dynamic. There definitely is a lot of very on-the-nose imagery concerning those two, but hey, I appreciate the effort. So it's funky, it's different, it's cool, but I just prefer my boy Vincent. So now we're gonna move on to the portion of the video where I discuss the different special and practical effects used in each of the movies. In the original, obviously everything was practical. The fire in the beginning of the movie feels very dangerous and real. You also had Vincent Price and this other guy doing some decent stunt work amidst real flames. I mean, you gotta give them props. I have said before that I think that Vincent Price gave his best performance of all time in this movie, because no matter what was demanded of him, aside from maybe some questionable punches, I believed him. Vincent Price is one of those people that that I would wish to be alive so that I could like sit down to have a dinner with them, he would definitely make top 5 on my list. I know that this is maybe more production design, but the wax figures themselves too are just incredible. Also, when they're melting, it very much gives me Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Could be kind of a stretch. I might be reaching, but perhaps this could have been an inspiration for that. Just that one part of Indiana Jones, nothing else. But all the wax figures, as I said, are just beautiful, particularly the ones that were meant to be made from corpses. And Vincent Price's scarred makeup effects also looked incredible. And also, apparently because he looked so grotesque, he was not allowed to enter certain buildings while he was wearing it, namely the studio commissary, because that is where people were eating, and the first time that he walked in there, apparently there was some girl who turned green and almost fainted. Then the rest of the patrons got up and headed for the door. So I guess he had to eat alone in his trailer or something. That's kind of sad. And I might be getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I think that the effects they used, the makeup on Vincent Price in the original, actually hold up better than the ones used in the 2005 remake. So I guess I'll get into the remake special effects right now. In the end, we do see Vincent's marred face. It was scarred from when he was separated from his twin brother, and they do use CGI for this. Just looking at these two side by side, I personally feel like the one that was made almost 70 years ago actually holds up better than the one that was made just about 20 years ago. That's just me though. But in the remake, we are treated to a lot of gory moments that are actually done with practical effects. This movie 100% embraced its R rating. We get a beheading, we get arrows shot into people, they're stabbing, fingers getting clipped off, mouths being ripped open after being sealed with super glue, and a particularly disgusting moment with a recently waxed person having his face peeled away. And of course, the amazing death of Paris Hilton with a pipe through the head. I wish I could show literally any of that, but you know, don't want to upset Mommy Susan. The last thing that I want to touch on concerning the effects and whatnot is I feel like for the most part, everything else in the 2005 remake holds up. My only complaint really is his face kind of thing going on. I do think they used a little bit of CGI when the museum was being destroyed in the end, but other than that, almost everything is practical in a time where CGI was becoming increasingly popular. So I do actually commend the remake for everything that it did practically, namely the wax figures as well, and not to mention we did get to see a lot of different body parts underneath the wax figures in the remake. But the last thing that I want to touch on concerning not exactly the effects, but I guess the production design, I kind of just felt like it fit in this category. The original had really big set pieces. I mean, they really did make an entire wax museum just for the movie. And same thing for the remake, but instead of just a museum, it was an entire little town full of wax figures. And on top of that, of course, there was a ton more gore because that was what was expected during that decade. And I'm glad that they were able to kind of pull that off in an effective way, because I feel like oftentimes with remakes, they try to just do everything bigger and better and louder and with more blood. But in this instance, it made the story a lot more unique, a lot more disturbing. I think they upped the ante in a really interesting and cool way. So I guess kind of plot-wise, production design-wise, I do prefer the remake because it is so unique. I think for a long time, this movie didn't really receive much acclaim because, I mean, no, let's look at the material, but there still are some things that make this movie so unique. It's definitely earned its place as a cult classic. I feel like I'm kind of veering off course, so let's just get into our next topic, which is discussing all of the themes of each of these movies. The original had this kind of self-aware energy on macabre art. As I mentioned, there was a lot of dialogue about it in the beginning, where Price's character is essentially like, no, I won't stoop to the level of those audiences. My work means more to me than that. And his partner kind of rightfully pointed out their money is as good as anyone else's. And his partner is obviously more money driven, right? So his intentions aren't the best, but he is pointing out that there is another audience that does need tending to. And it's almost speaking to the audience watching the movie, because at the end of the day, that's kind of what we paid to see. We want to see the macabre. We want to feed our morbid curiosity. So I love the self-awareness, even if as an audience member and horror lover, that kind of makes me maybe question my taste a little bit. But then because the character totally flips his switch, that's all good. I also love how much the original is centered on the art and how far people are willing to go to create and defend their art. Because as an artist myself, you know, a writer, a content creator, like, yeah, this is just YouTube, but I'm still creating something at the end of the day. I write a script, I set up all my lights, my computer, my camera, my microphone, everything is designed the way that I want it to be. I essentially act in front of the camera and then I edit it all together, and then at the end there is this product that you guys consume. And I feel very much that my content is an extension of myself, of my being. I'm sure painters, especially photographers, etc. all feel very similar. You are your art to an extent. They even take that in a literal sense with Vincent's character, because by the end he is actually crafting and molding a wax face for himself that he wears. And then that facade is literally broken and stripped off of him in the end, and it reveals the madness underneath. Also, this is a whole other bag of worms, but we could— oh, the fly got out! This fly is gonna make me lose my mind. Ugh, never mind. This next thing is a whole other bag of worms, so I'm not really gonna get into it. But we could also talk about the objectification of Susan, how Vincent Price's character really only sees her as something he can utilize to be his next wax figurine. Granted, he also has a victim who is a man, but he kind of obsesses over Susan because all he can see her as is his Marie Antoinette. And with complete disregard for her being a human being with emotions and a brain and everything like that, he just straps her down naked and alive, ready to be sprayed with hot wax. But like I said, whole other can of worms, don't really want to talk about that right now, because I want to get into the remake, which is very thematically confused. They really wanted to make the movie about twins. I showed you some of the imagery concerning the antagonists of the movie, those twins, but there's another plot line of the movie that also follows the same theme. Only, I don't know, I don't feel like I could really call it a theme. Well, like, it is a theme of the movie, but I'm talking more about like the messaging of the movie, you know what I mean? I feel like they just really wanted to do something with twins, and they were kind of trying to say something, but they actually said nothing. They meander so much with this random plot line that Chad is the evil twin. He's just gotten out of jail and he's set up as this guy who, oh, he's so cool, he's so bad. And then at one point, the guy that gets beheaded is given the keys to the truck because supposedly Chad was the one that crashed the truck. But then when they're driving the truck, it's revealed that he actually wasn't the one that crashed it. He just took the fall for his friend. And it's like, why? Ooh, he's not that bad of a guy all of the sudden. It doesn't really count as character development because he hasn't learned anything. He hasn't changed. It's just a bit of information that is allowing the audience to see him a little bit differently all of a sudden. It also didn't really mean anything that he and Carly were twins. It didn't end up really meaning anything that the antagonists were twins either. It just provided some kind of weird imagery. It didn't really do anything for the story except for the two pairs of twins kind of, I guess, mirrored each other. And there are some other plot lines that you think might have some deeper thematic meaning, but then they go nowhere. Like Paris Hilton thinks she's pregnant for a second. Get rid of that. Carly wants to go to New York for fashion school or something. Don't care. Generally, I would want to know information like this because it makes the characters more well-rounded, but I only want that information if it's going to be significant at some point later. And in this case, it literally has no meaning, even though all of the dialogue in the movie is so blatantly expository, like they want you to know the information, but then nothing ever really comes back around. Except I guess in the end, Carly is no longer held back by her boyfriend because he's dead, and now she can go to New York, and originally I guess he wasn't really down to go to New York, so, you know, it was a moment that was like good for her, but I'm grasping at straws, right? Like I'd be grasping at straws trying to come up with anything that is thematically deeper than that about this movie, because this movie, as beautiful as it is, as unique as it is, all it really is at its core is an early 2000s teen slasher, and slashers don't really need to say much at the end of the day. That's why I say cut all this weird unnecessary junk, the weird random subplots, just give us the slasher. The whole town being full of rigged wax figures and crazy killer twins, that's enough for me. I think that it stands on its own well enough to the point where I don't really care about character development. I hope you get what I mean. You know, some movies are really just meant for entertainment, and this movie is so gorgeous. The practical effects are amazing. It's so stupid. The deaths are so fun that it really just stands on its own. I don't need all that other stuff, especially because the movie comes in at like an hour and 52 minutes. It's quite long, and the original was about an hour and 20, hour and 25 or something. To me, that is perfect. That is the perfect length of a movie. That movie did what it needed to do. It communicated everything that it needed to communicate. It actually went above and beyond because that movie was shorter and it still managed to say a lot more than the remake. But when it comes to choosing a favorite, I do rate the original as 5 out of 5 stars. The remake, I give a 4.5 out of 5 stars. But even so, I don't think I could choose a favorite. They both have their moments that I adore. When it comes to protagonists, I prefer the remake. When it comes to villains, I prefer the original. When it comes to the practical effects, I don't know if I could really choose. I think that the look of Vincent Price is a lot better, but then all of the gore with the blood and stuff is so much better in the remake. Thematically, the original is indeed a lot richer, but then the remake, it really is just a teen slasher, and I don't expect much more from it at the end of the day, so I can't choose a favorite. I don't really have a favorite. Let me know if you do, though. I feel like a good majority of my audience would probably prefer the remake, if that makes sense. Not everyone really enjoys movies from the 50s, but in my opinion, having just rewatched it to make this video, I feel like the original, even though it came out in 1953, a solid, what, like 68 years ago, it still really does hold up. I'm not just saying that because it is a movie that is so beloved by me. I actually really do think that it holds up, so I hope that if you haven't seen it, you do check it out, as well as the remake. I adore both of these movies. I hope that you found that interesting. I haven't done a original versus remake comparison in a very long time. It is a lot of fun though. I'm hoping to do quite a few more of these throughout my Decades of Horror series that I'm doing this spooky season. This is only my second video in that series. My next video in this series will be my top 10 horror movies of the 1960s. And the 60s is definitely a blind spot in my knowledge, 60s and 70s. My favorite decades are the 50s and then like the 90s and later. So watching 60s movies has been really interesting. Of course, leave me any recommendations that you have below. Some of you guys left me some really good ones on my last video, so I'm trying to go through all of those right now, and that'll probably be my next video that comes out. Or maybe I'll do my part 1 of my September wrap up first, I'm not sure. Either way though, if you're new, I hope that you stick around and subscribe. Also click the like, click the notification bell so you never miss a new video from me. I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that I catch you in the next one. Bye!